This is Joy. Okay, Joy's mother came into my office shortly after I got involved in trying to remove aspartame from carbonated beverages, or keep it from being put into carbonated beverages. I got a call from the story's in the book in case I blubber my way through this stupid thing. But she came to my office and she had an envelope. It was an autopsy report about her daughter who was born a few weeks earlier. She pulled the autopsy report out and this picture fell to the ground. I picked it up and she said, "You keep that and you keep this, and I'm telling you," please, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. That the stuff in this bottle is what caused this. Okay, the stuff in this bottle is what caused this. She had a liter bottle of Diet Coke in her hand. I had heard nothing about birth defects being associated with aspartame. I went to the I'll show you. I went to see the docket file. I was a professor at a major university. I went to see the docket file. That's all the testing they will have done relative to the safety of the product before they put it in carbonated beverages. Okay. They had kept me cooling my jets outside the door for 6 hours before they let me in. I got in and I had to sign this paper. Well, they handed me this paper. And at the bottom it said, "Memos have been removed." And I said, "Well, what are these memos that have been removed?" I said, "Well, this is secret stuff that the company wants to keep to themselves." And I said, "I want to see this." And they said, "Well, you can apply." Well, okay, I applied. This was almost 30 years ago. Last year, I got the memo. Now, Joy died from neuro 2 birth defect, hydrocephalus, really serious. I got the memo. Here's the memo. It's dated 1979. Okay, it's from the Food and Drug Administration between their testing facilities. And it said, in both rabbit studies, aspartame appeared to cause birth defects. The birth defects were neural 2 birth defects, hydrocephalus. You cannot release a food additive that causes terata. Terata is birth defect. It can't be done. It never should have been done. 2 separate studies done by 2 independent laboratories caused terata. Okay, I didn't know that. I didn't know it when Joy's mom came to my office. I had to go to my lab and start testing methyl alcohol, which I knew was a toxic component, to see what happened. And I found that it did cause neuro 2 birth defects. I looked at the data that was coming in from the Center of Disease Control. It didn't look like neuro 2 birth defects were increasing in the human population. So I said, well, I hate to release this and worry a bunch of people. So I just waited. I had to wait before other labs came up and proved themselves. Other labs proved that it did cause neuro 2 birth defects. And then I heard from the Center of Disease Control 9 years later that, oops, guess what? Neuro 2 birth defects have been detected using ultrasound and were being aborted. And guess what? We were not counting these defects in our statistics. And yes, indeed, neuro 2 defects have gone up over the period of years that I was checking for. Okay. My rat pups, okay, and this is not all of them, but this is a percentage of them whose mothers were fed methanol at a high enough concentration to cause an effect, because I had to increase the methanol high enough so that the way you do it, but it's a simple thing to do. You just introduce into the animal enough methanol to fill up all of their peroxisomes, and then there's a little left over, so the alcohol dehydrogenase in their cell can produce formaldehyde, and then you get a similar effect to humans. It's difficult to do, but any laboratory can do it. This rat pup, whose brain is hemorrhaging and the cerebellum. This is exactly the part of the brain that is damaged in autism. This specific part of the cerebellum. It goes in your genes. You know, Nova, the show Nova. Nova, you know, I like Nova. I like watching Nova. Nova tends to be very industry sympathetic. Their funding comes from Dow Chemical Company. This particular show was funded by Dow Chemical Company, who was a founder of the Methanol Institute, a founder of the Formaldehyde Institute. Okay, they talk about twins. It's a story about twins, and they're talking about this ghost in their genes. The most interesting set of twins, in fact, the center of the entire show was a set of identical twins, one of which was normal, had no problems, a bright little girl. The other one, she spent her whole day with spittle from her mouth wiping the television screen. Autistic, heavily autistic. The only difference they found between these two kids was methylation. There was methylation going on in the chromosomes. The epitome, this is supposedly the mechanism that controls how the genes operate. The epitome of her chromosomes were changed by methylation. Okay, so in this show, they had this diagram. I didn't get their permission to use this diagram. I just want you to know. So you can turn me in. They're showing how this happens. And they're showing this thing they call a methyl group as the cause of the change that causes autism in the one child. Then later on in the article, they call it a methyl molecule. Well, if any of you had chemistry, if any of you have majored in chemistry, if any of you whose whole life is chemistry, none of you have ever heard of a methyl molecule. Or there's such a thing as a methyl, but what's a methyl molecule? That's formaldehyde. The molecule, the environmental molecule that they should have said loud and clear on that show that causes autism is formaldehyde. And there it is. Let's look at the numbers. This is the key. This is all I can do. I can say, okay, the Center for Disease Control gives me their numbers. I put them on my graph. And then I'm showing you what the results are. This had to go through a polishing. These numbers were hard to find. They only came out just this last year in an elegant article that I got on my website. This woman, instead of just reporting the date that these children were diagnosed as autistic, she went back to their birth dates and took all these cases that were recorded in the Educational Department of the United States with thousands of cases of autism and took them all back to the birth date of the kid, not to the date that they were diagnosed, because it takes a long time sometimes for these brain modifications to cause the actual disease. So she wanted to find, when did this epidemic originate? When did it originate? This is her data on my chart of aspartame consumption. Well, it originated, the epidemic originated 9 months after aspartame was added to carbonated beverages. There are the numbers. This is a much longer term. So when did autism start? When aspartame started, especially when it was put in carbonated beverages. Carbonated beverages, I can see where a woman who's pregnant doesn't mind consuming carbonated beverages. What we're finding, we're trying to do a survey of women who have had autistic kids. It's hard to get the data, but we're asking, what did you consume? And so far, the major product of consumption was light yogurt containing aspartame. Okay, methyl alcohol is a scourge of human beings. I mean, it is a toxic substance that is only toxic to human beings. We should have looked at this 100 years ago. But 100 years ago, we didn't know. We didn't know until recently that this toxisome metabolize methyl alcohol. So there are lots of stories. There are other diseases. I mean, kids that have trouble with attention disorders. I'm sure that has something to do with it, but I can't prove it to you. I can prove all this that I'm telling you today, and that's bad enough. That's enough to get people excited about stopping this from